Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Monkey Wrench. I'm Kelly, the monkey with the wrench. Today we're going to be working on this Bilt self-propelled with brakes on it. Now this is one of the fancier ones, a battery compartment there, it's got a key start. But basically it's just your everyday average self-propelled mower. Now the customer contacted me a few days ago. And he says, hey, my mower is giving me some issues. And I bought it from you. And my first response was, okay, great, bring it back. Obviously, I warranty my work, and we'll see what's going on with it. But he was calling on my own phone number, and I didn't recognize him. Turns out, anyway, I sold him this mower 4 years ago. 4 years ago. So when I sell stuff, it lasts. And this was used. I went to thinking about it, and I remember that I found this in the trash. I don't exactly remember what was wrong with it, but I think the starter was no good, and I sold it without a starter. And he's just been pull starting it for 4 years, but gave it regular tune-up and all that. Anyway, the complaint is very simple. He said he has a pretty big lawn. He cuts for 30 minutes or so. It starts right up every time. It runs like a top. But if he stops and turns it off to go get a drink and cool off in the Florida heat, and he comes back out and goes to start it, it just will not start no matter what he does. So he told me, he said, Kelly, I learned a trick. I have a little piece of rope, and when I go to use it, after 20 or 30 minutes, he's an old guy, when I need to take a break for a minute and go grab a drink of water or whatever, he says, I just use the string and tie it off and let it run in the yard when I go and get my drink, and then I come back 5 minutes later and I don't shut it off. And then I can finish the whole yard and it runs without an issue. And I said, well, it's the weirdest thing, but that's usually a pretty self-explained problem, which I will tell you in a minute. So what I'm going to do right now is, just to show you, I'm going to start the machine and I'm going to let it run for the next 30 minutes. I have these are clamps that I use. These are the small ones. Get them from Walmart, Harbor Freight, whatever. And they go right on your handle, and they will hold your bail down for you. They're not big, so they won't slide down the side and stop holding it with vibration. They just hold the handle down for me. And while the dogs are barking in the background, I'm going to upset them. I'm going to start this thing, let it run for 30 minutes, and I will be back. There's no primer on this one. And it's full of fuel. And I've already checked the oil level, so we're good to go. Let's go ahead and start it. Should start pretty easy. Starts on the first pull. You can hear it's nice and quiet. Let's leave it for 30 minutes and see what happens. Okay, there's something unexpected. As soon as I killed the camera, I went ahead and shut it off. I wanted to double check the oil and make sure that the gas tank was full. Even though it should run for 45 minutes to an hour on a full tank, I wanted to make sure it was full. And I had it shut off for maybe a minute, and I went to pull it, and at first it started and kind of for about 30 seconds and died, and now it won't even start. Now there's no choke on this, there's no primer, but she won't start. And you saw it started on the first pull, and it's just been sitting here in the yard for 2 days. So that tells me that we've got some kind of a fuel problem. So I'm going to pull the carburetor off. First I'm going to let it sit for about 2 hours, because he said that every time he goes out to start it, it starts right up. He also said if he pulls it with like a weak pull, because he's like 75 years old, he said that it gives him trouble, but if he pulls it a good hard pull, it starts right up, no problem. And you saw that. But it didn't even run for a whole minute. I killed the camera, shut it right back off, checked the oil, filled it with fuel. Maybe a minute later, tried to start it, and this is what's happening. So I believe there's going to be some junk in the bowl, possibly some water, some dirt. We're going to pull the carburetor off and take a look at that. But first I'm going to let it sit for 2 hours as if it were just sitting like he said, see if it starts again on the first pull. Because it runs so good, it's a starting issue. Could be a choke situation. I don't know. Could be a lot of things. Let's figure it out. Okay, I let the machine sit for about 15 minutes. And I went inside and I was thinking about it. And, well, let me just show you. It's been another 20 minutes or so. I had a sandwich. I want to see if it'll do what it did a minute ago, or a few minutes ago. See, it starts on the first pull again. It runs great. No problems at all. Tells you something also. I tilted it back so that I could make sure that the wheels were engaging when you pull the self-propelled, and as you saw, every time I tilted it back it was half stalling. It wasn't running good. You put it back down, it runs great. And I'm going to try and start it one more time. Adam Savage would say, there's your problem. Now, again, I am just double checking that it is full of fuel, and I'm going to see if I can even get you to be able to see that there is fuel in there. So what I think is happening, let me pour a little more fuel in there and make sure. Now, because I am not the kind of person that does things behind the scenes and lies to my audience, I want you to see. When I stopped the video in the beginning, I did check the oil, and when I went to see if I had any fuel, I didn't. So I just ran down to the gas station to get more fuel. So I want you to see me filling this thing up with fuel, and I'm going to start it, and I'm going to tilt it just like I did before and see if the problem goes away. I could have just done that and then turned the camera back on and said, oh, I'm not sure what's going on, let me find out. I want you to see this stuff step by step, because that's how you're going to do it when you're at home. If you can watch me do it and learn from what I do, it'll save you time. So let's see if it'll start. See, it won't even start now. I'm going to take the air filter cover off and give it some shot. Because I've been doing this for so long, there's so many things that I forget, so many things I don't deal with on the regular. The reason I'm going to spray this with a little bit of carb cleaner or starting fluid is to prime it, because it seems to run just fine as soon as I start it. But we know that's not our problem, because if I let it sit, it will start. So I just want to start it and do the tilt test again. Should start on the fourth pull. You see, that's not our problem. Now we know we're dead full on fuel. Now we know, and that usually starts on the third or fourth pull when you spray it with carb spray. You can see we're full of fuel, and it still didn't start until the 7th, 8th, 8 or 9 pulls. And when I tilted it, it still wanted to stall and run like crap. So the reason I'm showing you all of this is because I believe that the main jet in the carburetor is clogged. And I'll tell you why. The tank is gravity fed. So whether it has 1/4 of an inch of fuel or it's completely full, no matter what, that fuel is going to go down and fill the bowl of that carburetor. So the bowl itself is full. Now the carburetor runs on fumes. Most people think that it runs on a jet of fuel, like your fuel injected. Most people don't understand that a small engine like this runs on the fumes that come off of the fuel. It's such a small amount of fuel. So having, say, 3 ounces of fuel in that carburetor bowl, and it just taking the fumes out of it basically, when it's running well and you tilt it, that's showing me that somehow the draw from the bowl up into the carburetor is either clogged, and that's what's stopping it, or that maybe the needle and seat is clogged and it's not allowing the fuel to get from the tank even into the carburetor bowl. That's why when you tilt the mower, that's why we're having issues with it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. You don't need to see that. It's only 2 bolts. I'm going to take that off, and we're going to take it into the bench and see what it looks like. Okay, now I just prepped this. What I did was I took the 2 screws out of this that hold that down, and there are 3 bolts in the top of your fuel tank that bolt that down as well. I took those out. The reason is there's also a 4th bolt underneath that goes through the bottom of the tank that holds it in place but also allows it to pivot. So instead of crimping off the fuel line, I just take a second and take those 3 bolts out. That way I can tilt the tank. Because I want to see first if we have good flow coming from the tank through the line, or if the line is clogged. Clearly the line is not clogged. Now I can take and tilt that tank up, and I won't have to worry about any fuel going anywhere that it's not supposed to go. So now I'm just going to take off the carburetor. I'm going to have to get a ratchet. Oh, okay. One was very loose and the other one is so tight that I can't get it off yet. So I've got to take this one out, which I believe is a 6. And it's the weirdest thing. I always have trouble with this. Thank you, train. It's got to be either the dogs barking or a train going off. And this one happens to just want to piss everybody off by flying. Pause. Now the trains that run through here can be 800, 1,000 cars long, but at least it's far enough away that I can't hear him blowing his frickin' horn again. This is a 1/4 inch on top to take the choke lever off. I love this ratchet, by the way. This kit from Cobalt that was sent to me by a subscriber, because one ratchet does the job of all 3. On the end here it has 1/4 inch, has 1/2 inch here, and it has 3/8 here, so I can have all different size sockets and still only need 1 ratchet. And it's actually a pretty good quality ratchet too, and I really love this thing because now I'm not carrying 2 ratchets with me all the time. So we take that off. Let's get in here. That one was real tight and that one was real loose, so that's going to cause an issue as well. Sucking air between the carburetor and the intake manifold. And we're going to take that off. This one just has the one arm that goes right there. We're going to take this thing inside, open it up, and see what it looks like. Now, I know my shop is always dirty, but believe it or not, I'm emptying the shop. I used to have boxes of spare parts that went the complete way through there, over there, under there. I am emptying out the shop. I'm getting rid of all the things that I don't use. I've been getting rid of my milk crate shelving. I'm getting rid of all the things I don't use, throw out the garbage I don't use, sell off the tools that I rarely use, and get ready for the move, basically. So now I need to just see. That's where we need to be. Right there. Now the first thing I noticed is normally when you take a carburetor off and you tilt it, a lot of fuel comes out. And in this case, we're not getting a whole lot of fuel coming out. We know because we pulled off the fuel line to the carburetor, we know we were getting plenty of fuel coming out. So let's just see. Now we got plenty of fuel in there and it doesn't look too horrible. And I'm going to take this over here to the light to see if I see any water in it. There's a lot of gunk and dirt, but there's no water. And the bottom of this thing is pretty well corroded. I mean, you know, this thing's pretty old. Now, before I do anything, I'm going to do my Clarinet test. And that is when I blow through the intake and I use the float, which is the needle and seat, and see if when I push it up, it cuts off the air. It's cutting it off real quick and it's real hard to blow through, which tells me that it's definitely got a clog in there. So the needle and seat seems to be working, but my guess is there's a clog. And then here on these Briggs carburetors, there's a little gasket. It's just a paper gasket that goes on this jet screw. It goes in the bottom, and that one tore, so I'll have to get a new one. But there's also little holes, one on each side, and a hole that goes down the center. And if you take that and hold it up to the sunlight, I can see through that, and I can blow through that. So I know that's not our issue. I believe that there's a clog in this main jet. So let me clean this out. You've seen me do this 100 times. I'm going to clean it. Then I'm going to put it back together, and we're going to put it back on the machine, and we're going to see if it made a difference. Now, normally I am beyond showing you putting it back together, but I want you to learn along with me. I found where the needle goes into the seat, there was a little bit of roughness. I took a Q-tip on a drill, spun it, cleaned that out. There was some clogging in the main jet as well as the second jet. So I cleaned all that out. We're going to put it back together so you can watch me put it back together, because it only takes a minute. Put that on. Put that on. Put these back in. If you can find the hole, which, you know, I'm trying to hurry because I got mosquito problems out here. And no mosquito spray. I ran out. So the longer I'm out here making a video for you guys, the more bites I got to deal with. Now I'm lucky that even though I get bit a lot, it takes 30 minutes to be out of my system. So if I get bit 30 minutes later, it no longer itches. So for you guys, I'll just have to itch for a half hour. Now we're back on there. Now when you put your choke lever back on, make sure it's in the choke. This is an automatic choke, so it's no big deal. It only goes in one place, fits right into there, and you're good to go. Now we're putting that back on with our 1/4 inch, tighten it down, make sure it still moves correctly. That's it. Now I'm not going to bother to put my top case back on or my air filter, because that's not going to be our problem right now. It's not going to solve our problem. It's not important. So I found these pliers on the ground yesterday when I was riding my bike. I find a lot of tools that fall out of trucks on the road. So I'm using them already. I'm just going to put these back down real quick with my 3 bolts. Perfect example of having to use an adapter. Put something in and then it comes off, and stuff is a pain in my balls. But you work with what you can work with, and there are certain things that will just never be perfect. But I do really enjoy working on these machines, and filming this stuff is a bit of a pain in the ass. Trying to show you guys what's going on in a timely manner, but it's worth it. Anyway, now we're back in business. The fuel's back on. It's had enough time to fill the carburetor. Make sure I move all the extras. These are the screws for the top case and the bolts for the air filter. Let's make sure you're still in play. Let's pull it, see if it'll start, and do the tilt test. Turn it back off, see if it'll start again. Start again. Okay, so the carburetor was definitely dirty. I think what's happening now, oh, I don't even know if you were able to see when I tilted it up. I was tilting it at a good 45-degree angle. And I think what was happening was all the fuel that's in the bowl was going to the back side, and it was just, there was still enough feeding in that it's coming up the main jet, but not enough to keep it full. Yes, we have a leak right now. You see that? It's dripping. Let's see if I can zoom in. But that's because the washer, the jet underneath, had a paper gasket, and the paper gasket was torn, and I can't find my gasket, so I put it back together. So I'm just going to put a new gasket in there, and that'll stop that leak. Now I'm going to run it for 30 minutes. I'm going to stop it and start it occasionally during that time, and make sure there's no magneto problem. But the carburetor needed to be cleaned desperately, and I believe that was the issue. So I don't know if this is going to help anybody, because when I tilt it, it does still stammer. But I believe that it's the gravity feld when it's tilted up, then the fuel is not running through the fuel line, filling up the carburetor bowl, and I think that's what's causing the stammer. Because when I just tilted it some, like you would if you were cutting the grass and turning the mower, you just lifted off the ground enough to switch it. There was no issues. It was when I tilted it at 45-degree angles that happened. But at least now we're able to start it over and over again, and the carburetor was dirty. So if you start your machine and it starts fine on the first time, first pull, second pull, and it runs, and then you turn it off and you go to start it again and nothing happens, the chances are you got a clogged carburetor. I cleaned that out, cleaned out the main jet, and now she's starting on the regular. So Thanks for stopping by. Sorry if this was a long one. It wasn't meant to be, but I'll see you soon. Now I have something interesting going on. I let this thing run for 40 minutes while I was doing some other things. And I came out here and I shut it off and I started it up again. And let me show you what's going on. You won't be able to hear me talk. I haven't done anything to it that you didn't see. I cleaned the carburetor one time. Obviously I pulled the bowl off so that I could put a new bowl gasket, bowl washer. It's a gasket. It's the little gasket that goes around the little screw at the bottom that holds the bowl on, that has a jet in it. It's not the main bowl gasket, but that's what was leaking. I found a new one, I put it on. And I did nothing else. I started it and I let it run for 40 minutes. And as you can see now, no matter how high I tilt it, it's still running just as it should. So what that tells me is, and I know this for a fact, when you clean a carburetor, oftentimes, especially if it's an old carburetor, 4 or 5 years old, obviously if you don't put it in an ultrasonic cleaner, and sometimes you still got to run it through there 2 or 3 times, you may not get out all of the gunk and the crap that was inside of the carburetor. So I cleaned it once. I ran my little wires through all the ports and jets and sprayed everything out with carb cleaner and then compressed air. And as you could see earlier in the video, it was starting on the first pull every time. But when I tilted it, it was still wanting to stall. Blah, 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 blah. So sometimes what happens, and I do this on every repair, is I always run the machine for 30 to 40 minutes, then turn it off, then try and start it again. Because if the magneto is starting to go bad, after 30 minutes when it's nice and hot, when you turn it off and you go to start it again, it won't start. Then you have to let it 30 minutes to cool off, and it starts again. And that's originally what I thought was the issue on this particular machine. However, now that we've gone through it, we found that it was in fact a dirty carburetor and that the carburetor was loose on the manifold. One of the bolts was loose. So after 30 minutes of running, everything got hot. Even the carburetor gets hot. And after 30 minutes of running, the fuel going through the carburetor, through all the jets and everything else, cleaned out any little bit that I had missed during my cleaning, my one cleaning. Half the time I have to end up cleaning a carburetor twice to get it to work properly. So I let it run. It cleared itself out the rest of the way. So it was not, in fact, gravity holding the fuel down, not letting it go through. It wasn't gravity inside of the bowl of the carburetor. It was, in fact, still some dirt in there that was causing a choke point. Not quite enough fuel was getting through. Enough fuel was getting through when it was flat, horizontal, but the minute you lifted it up, not enough fuel was still continuing to go through the carburetor to become gas, to become fumes, to run the machine. So if you run across this problem, after you clean out the carburetor and you get it to start every time, and get it to run, let it run for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, even an hour. Let it blow through a whole tank of gas. In half the time, it will clean out the rest of the problems all by itself. So thanks for sticking around this far in the video. Hit the like button. It's somewhere between my chin and my balls, and I'll see you on the next one.